Welcome to She Been Ready, the podcast. She Been Ready is a conversation, a declaration, and a clarification that Black women have always led. On this podcast, I, Dr. Wendy Williams, educator, psychologist, leader, and auntie, will be joined by Black women who lead and those who have been led well by them. So, you don't have to get ready when you stay ready, and you can trust in the leadership of a Black woman because she been ready. All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome back to She Been Ready, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Williams, and I am, as always, very excited to bring to you our guest today. We always have so many wonderful guests, and today is no exception. We are with who I am calling our sister CEO, Dr. Carole Dorham-Kelly, or as she likes to be called, and we'll be calling her throughout our talk and conversation, DC. DC is the Chief Executive Officer of Rubicon programs. At Rubicon, they do exceptional work to address the scourge of poverty by equipping participants in their programs to develop the economic mobility to move out of poverty through developing assets, income, wellness, and connections. Really broad-based and expansive and integrative work that they're doing, trying to get at the root causes of a problem rather than just fixing or trying to address one thing. So they're looking for sustainability in the assistance that they're providing the participants. I asked DC to join me in this conversation during our first meeting, the first time we ever met. And we did so in one of those very organic and, but when you meet somebody or you hear somebody, like, I need to meet them and know them. And we were connected through another sister colleague, sister friend. And so there was that entree that was there and the door was open. And, we were both invited to participate in this conference, which was about workforce issues. My work is all about Black women at work. And DC was, talking about her work with Rubicon and some of the focus of that. And at that time, I learned that she was a counseling psychologist. And so now we are just kindred. We are a special breed of people, I think. And so in that moment, I knew that we had to not only continue our relationship. So we are sisters forever now. But I wanted to talk with her about this idea of becoming a counseling psychologist and being the chief executive officer of such a renowned and important organization within our area and the services that are provided and the supports that are provided. So because I'm a counseling psychologist and a scholar and practitioner of leadership development in that leadership development space, I was so curious about DC's experience as a counseling psychologist, a Black woman, and a CEO, and how the intersection of all of these things for her come together. She is a whole boss, y'all. And that's BAWSE, whole boss. And I wanted to talk with her about who she is and her background professionally, as well as her identity, shape her leadership. So DC, welcome to She Been Ready, the podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. So excited for this conversation today.
Me too. So one of the first questions that we ask folks when they come on the pod is, how did you know that you've been ready? So that, how did you know that you were ready to lead, to be at the helm of an organization, of a piece of work? We talk to folks from a wide cross section of industries and backgrounds. What leadership looks like for them is not always typical, isn't always housed or encased in a job. Yeah. What stage of your career were you in? How old were you, if you don't mind us knowing when you realized, like, I need to be in charge?
Yeah. I have to say it was an evolution of realization, right? I can't say that it was a point in time necessarily, but I can remember the phase, right? I can remember where I was in my journey in a transition. So for me, that realization that began when I began to ask myself, why not me? Right. Was in my current organization when I initially joined my current organization as the wellness director.
Okay.
So since I completed graduate school and began in the world of work, I have really led with the psychology identity, really led about wellness, resiliency, community health, trauma. And so that's the space that I was holding in all of my professional spaces. I didn't realize that I was limiting myself initially.
Okay.
Thought I was doing great things. I was like, okay, you know, DC is here. DC is of the community. DC is multilingual. You're going to braid and bridge the world from academia and your formal education to your lived experience. And that is going to be of service to the communities that you identify with. So that's been from day one. But the transition to thinking more broadly about my capacity or about a broader platform to lead came in my current organization, where my boss, my supervisor at the time, who was the chief program officer of Rubicon programs, which was not wellness specific. Like, I could lead workforce services. I could lead financial coaching. I could lead the breadth of work that Rubicon programs does. And so that was my first, why not? Why limit myself to wellness in psychology only? And why not? So that was my first, okay, let's put your name in the hat. You better put your name in the hat.
You better.
So that for me was around 2016.
Okay. Which not very long ago.
10 years after my doctorate. So I completed my doctorate in 2005. 2006, I was in my first job with Children's Hospital, Oakland, working in community-based mental health. And so I was I was doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing, right? I come home, I went away to Oregon, I came home to the Bay Area, was like, let me test this out. Let me see how much this training and this education really applies.
What it
my
do?
Community in my world. Is this real? Right?
What does it do?
Are they gonna laugh me off the stage? Is the Sandman about to come scoop me up out of here?
Oh no, not the Sandman.
Right. So that first 10 years was really about adapting and applying my learnings and making it me, right? Really about that intrapersonal development, if you will. And so it wasn't until 2016 where I felt like I was ready and confident enough to step out into a broader platform and lead more broadly. Reach.
So you were at Rubicon the entire time out of grad school?
Oh, no. No. So 2005, when I completed my doctorate, I went to Children's Hospital, Oakland. So that's where I completed my postdoc. And that is where I was first hired on post-degree in licensure.
I see. Got it. Okay.
So for the first 10 years, I was in Oakland, working at community-based mental health, rooted in West Oakland at McClymonds High School. And then I did about 5 years in East Oakland at Youth Uprising.
Okay.
So again, I'm from Richmond, born and raised, raised and rooted. These communities in Oakland are quite similar to my upbringing in Richmond, California. So that was on purpose in terms of where I wanted to first practice as a psychologist.
Okay.
Yeah. So 2016, I was still young because I went straight out of my bachelor's into the doctorate program. And so I completed my doctorate at 30. Before 30, 27.
Oh my God.
I was young.
Yeah, you were.
I was young. It was straight through, right? I didn't have a family yet. I didn't have, children or a partner to be responsible for. And so I was head down, let's do it. So goal oriented. But again, it was very much, I won't say rigid, but I will say focused in terms of psychology and really trying to come into my own as a psychologist and what that meant. And so coming from community mental health to nonprofit in 2016 was really when I first started to think about a broader platform of impact.
So this always happens. I know I wrote and sent you questions, but you are saying, when I know it's supposed to go into those, and then I'm like, I am rebellious and I don't listen even to myself. So
listen, we're going to follow our natural. Yes, we can go wherever we need to go.
I thought I finished my doctorate at 30.
Okay.
I felt very young. I was. And I felt very young even beginning the program, because as you know, in these counseling and clinical psychology programs, you start doing clinical work pretty early on in your studies. For us, we had a practicum that began the first semester as our coursework, and we were in practicum the entire time. Yep. So I was always, and for those of y'all listening, practicum is basically doing therapy under, lots of support and supervision.
Yep.
And I felt that, one of the reasons I made choices about where to go to school, I decided to leave. I'm from Southern California. I decided to leave California so I could go and grow up and go have some adversity. Now I know I have plenty of adversity before I left. I did not have to go do that to myself, but but I wanted to grow and I wanted to spread my wings and, do the whole thing. I can only imagine when you talk about being very focused in psychology and being 27 and being very ambitious. And, I'm only imagining and projecting onto you that you got a lot of the lessons and the things that folks have told little Black girls who are really smart about how to achieve and succeed, which was put your head down, go do your work and go smarter, faster, stronger. Right. But also being in the field of psychology where you have to hold the complexity of other people's lives, counseling psychology, holding the complexity of other people's lives and the dynamics of those lives, while also having not lived a whole lot. Like that's what I was facing into. So I wonder how that, the arc of your development, you're maturing, just as a young woman, but also being so focused. Do you see any relationships between that and as time in the field and you're growing and maturing and becoming more of the woman who you are and the leader who you are, seeing the expansiveness?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely had those limits and I experienced others placing those limits on me.
Okay.
So for a long time in my professional journey, I was very observant and hypersensitive to my age. And felt like others were interacting with me, young in me, like son in me, like, okay, not little, almost like a little girl. Right. And so I had a supervisor when I was in East Oakland. He was like, DC, you're not the youngest in the room no more. Like, you need to let that go. You need to let that limit go. Because I was holding it. And
How were you holding it? What were you doing that he could see or that you now know, look back, that you were doing?
I think what you were describing, almost discrediting myself or minimizing my experience or discounting my knowledge because I hadn't lived very long or because I was the youngest and I was raised to defer to elders. So I was around elders, right? In the room. And, that braids in with humility. Just because you came home with your doctorate, don't think you know more than nobody else. Right. And so those things, the age, the formal education and how that is experienced, all of that, I think, I won't say muted, but it definitely filtered how I showed up in space.
I see.
And now, and now, one, I'm not the youngest in the room anymore, but those are strengths, right? Those are strengths and those are things that I look for people coming behind me, right? Making sure I'm creating room and also calling out anyone who might be hesitant to share or questioning their value add. Like I know very firsthand that's not serving you. So I can see it in others and colleagues and team members.
Okay. I just want to, there's something rubbing against your microphone. I don't know if, okay.
All right.
It's interfering with your beautiful voice.
It might be this hair.
It's perfect now. Everything's fine. I don't want anything to interfere. Perfect. I appreciate you sharing that though too, because it's also speaking to how you lead in this current moment. And so this is one of the huge questions that I have, one of the ones that sort of center for me. And I think about it a lot and talk about it anecdotally. So it's really great to have an opportunity to ask you, which is that, as in our field, in counseling psychology, this is something that we connect around, and it has very specific characteristics that I think are quite apt for leadership, especially for human development and societal change. I think that there's a way in which, at least that I connect with my colleagues, and even when we met and had our first conversation, there was just so much synergy because we've come up in a field where we are able to think about concerns, issues, opportunities in similar ways. I'd love for you to share a bit about, and with our audience, about what a counseling psychologist is. Like, one, just tell, like, how would you describe what a counseling psychologist is? How is it different from other forms and practices of psychology and disciplines or areas within the discipline, and how you have experienced your training to uniquely prepare you for leadership in the C-suite?
So many layers there, right? But starting with how I define, experience, identify as a counseling psychologist. Is this okay with the mic?
You're fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm not going to bother you about that anymore.
Okay. So for me, the particular discipline of counseling psychology spoke to me and attracted me because one, it was rooted in community. It was rooted in normalizing the history of vocational counseling and, transitions. There just seemed to be more of a acknowledgement in this discipline of psychology for context, for environment. Like as I was reflecting on this idea, I was like, before there was a buzzword around trauma-informed care, counseling psychology was trauma-informed or experience-informed.
Yes,
right?
right.
And so in terms of finding myself as a Black woman, young Black woman at the time, in terms of finding my community in psychology, it was counseling psychology that was the most open, where I could see my community and myself in that umbrella, in that discipline, because it wasn't about pathology at the center.
I'm having a Me Too moment with you right now. It's yeah.
When we think about stigma, when we think about the old adage about how Black people don't seek services and, old and, lingering adage around, how we take care of ourselves or even talk about mental health needs. That was something I went into graduate school worried about. I'm out here getting this doctorate. I want to be a psychologist, but ain't nobody gonna receive me when I go home. And this, so really thinking about that. I also will say counseling psychology at the University of Oregon, where I studied, what stood out. It stood out as a different type of program. Their cohort model, for one, was different, just in the training experience, right? There was a clear and explicit commitment to developing and training psychologists that were representative of community. So my cohort coming in was a size of 9.
Okay, which is huge in counseling psych.
Correct. Yes. And in an academic setting, right?
Yes.
Not to be confused with professional schools that have much larger cohorts, right?
Yes.
And even on the University of Oregon campus, across the campus where the clinical psychology program was, the cohort was much bigger and there was a lot more emphasis on pathology. So I'll just say that what attracted me was that it felt like counseling psychology as a discipline was best positioned to join with, right? To develop my identity as a healer, as a helper, as a joiner, right? Not an expert, right? Not someone who's going to come into a situation and fix it or overdiagnose a situation or a problem. That all has its place.
Right.
In all disciplines of psychology, but I feel like counseling psychology specifically is one that made room for the whole person. That you were really looking at context, you were looking at experience, what happened to someone, and adjustment. Right. I was that early clinician who was like, everybody had an adjustment disorder. I'm not giving nobody, I'm not overdiagnosing nobody, even first year practicum. So this idea of the range of normal.
Yeah, the range of normal. Okay.
So that's what I would say in terms of those early years in attraction. Just recently, a girlfriend and a colleague of mine, she was sharing her early experiences of me when I came into my current organization. And was like, oh, we thought because you were a psychologist, that's why you were so approachable and warm. And as we've known you over the years, that's just who you are.
Yeah, that's who you
are. Like chicken or the egg. Like, did I choose counseling psychology because of who I am? Or, am I who I am because I chose counseling psychology? I know that ain't it. But there was a synergy there. So
I love how you were like, I'll pose the question, but that ain't it.
That ain't it.
No.
Yeah. So in terms of leadership and how counseling psychology serves me in my current role, in my evolving role as a leader with increasing responsibility and leading an organization with on average 160 staff members. So again, I stepped from clinical services and practice to managing all of our programs, right? And I have to say, in that process, Dr. Wendy, my connection to counseling psychology and vocational counseling and assessment and that whole piece, it took a sister friend of mine to be like, girl, you're doing counseling psychology. I wasn't going into nonprofit thinking, oh, this is rooted in the legacy of vocational and counseling psychology, but she was right. She was right. And I'll get to this later, but that really helped me, and it's helping me bring my identities back together, as I shared with you, this connection between the nonprofit sector and psychology. So I'll come back to that. But
okay.
In terms of a leader, in terms of leadership, and like I said, whether it is about staff development, whether it is about performance, whether it is about, managing contracts and financial resources, you have to work with people. So as a counseling psychologist, I think that experience in training and also early practice helped me develop a skin, a professional skin, which, let me just tell you, is different than my personal skin, because I'm emotional.
Unpack it.
Listen, I'm emotional. Lifetime movies used to give me every time. Snotting
Hallmark commercials.
Oh my goodness. BET, whatever.
Oprah shows.
All of it.
All of it.
So that is something that I was worried about. Like, you can't be up in here crying. They told you in training, don't be in here crying with folks.
Oh gosh.
But my professional skin, the ability to hold space and be a container for my colleagues and for folks who are looking to my leadership for guidance, for support, being able to provide honest but compassionate feedback, being able to pour into others, sharing the spotlight, like all of those things, I think are in part rooted in my journey as a counseling psychologist. The balance of creating a workforce, an environment, a workplace environment, right? I am largely in part responsible for the culture at Rubicon programs. I have a team, but even when I don't want people to look to me for leadership, they look to you. They look it, right? And so how I move, how I model, taking care of myself, how I model taking care of others, like all of those things, and the awareness of those things, like you can do that, but that self-awareness and awareness of others also I attribute to my counseling psychology training.
So this podcast is audio, but we do put images and video on Instagram when we promote and share. So folks are just going to see me shaking my head and nodding and shaking my head and just affirming and not shame, but they can't see it when they're listening to the audio. And I just want to say, just hearing you talk, and I think this is why I was so drawn to you. I mean, we just got on as if we've known each other forever, but was because you're just so affirming, because there are ways in which in my own leadership where I know that I am doing it differently. And some of the humility pieces that you just raised here are elements that actually frustrate me in other people's leadership when they can't access it and when their egos are a little too loud. Because as you said, leadership is relationship and working with people, supporting and understanding people and making room for different types of people and different types of dispositions and needs and ways of being. So for me, I'm always hurt and frustrated and flustered when I'm in spaces where we're not doing that. It bothers me entirely. So affirming what you just shared.
I say, yes, I'm glad. And this is that's powerful that you can share and identify in that, which is why I think this podcast and conversations like this are so important. When I think about early career, and I know we'll talk about that later, but so I'll wait.
But we can pop around because that's what Black women do in conversation too.
We follow our heart and our spirit. The energy is taking me there. Energy is taking me to that, the critical nature of that. And like I said, I can recall and re-experience early career experiences, and I'm committed to not
doing that.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right. So,
wow. So we've talked about some of the really great and wonderful things about being a counseling psychologist and how it supports your leadership, how the training and the preparation and the theoretical frameworks and orientations help us to hold space, all of that. Do you see any drawbacks to being a psychologist in senior leadership?
Yes.
I know. Tell me about
Yes, I do.
We wouldn't be fair if we didn't name it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's two sides to every coin. So for me, I think on the one hand, there's a certain level of ascribed credibility with formal education in some spaces, right? Okay. Oh, she's a doctorate. She's got her. There's a certain level of knowing that I'm presumed to have.
Okay. True.
The flip side of that is for my lived experience is questioned. Do I have to keep reminding y'all where I'm from? And so I think the drawback of psychology is that sometimes there is a presumption or a bias that if you have formal education, you didn't have a lived experience, or you've forgotten it, or you're removed from it, or you can't possibly relate. Even when you are speaking plain, I've gotten feedback from loved ones like, why you over explaining something, or why are you over? So even when I'm not, the perception is I am, and that I think that is a projection of whatever bias or assumptions comes with the doctorate. So for me, that's the drawback. It's more so about, now, luckily, I have a lot of things working in my favor for connection and relationships. So that doesn't usually linger, but I do think that sometimes it can be an initial barrier or something to work through in an early relationship. But hopefully it is my experience that I lead with humility. And so I don't hit anyone over the head with my doctorate. You see, I go by DC, and that's on purpose. My loved ones get mad at me for being like, why you don't be like Dr. Carole? DC, one, because the young people that I used to work with in West Oakland named me that.
They did.
That was a name. That was the nickname that the young people at McClymonds gave me. Is Dr. Carole Dorham-Kelly. One, that's a mouthful. So, I was walking the halls and I started hearing DC.
So was that like for Dr. Carole?
Yes, short for Dr. Carole. I love it. I love it. It stuck with me. It doesn't feel disrespectful. Like people are like, yo, you could get your credit. It doesn't feel, if it was in love. I received it in love and respect. And people know you don't have to hit them over the head with it. So the drawback is, despite leading with humility, despite leading with a relationship and connection, there is a, I think, initial perception of what I must be if I went and got this doctorate.
And this is the thing, right? This is the thing around race and racism and gender and intersectionality, is that people, that the world has decided what Black women are, and has not had the humility to enter into a conversation, into an inquiry around our interiority, which is vastly diverse and different and engaging and multifaceted. We are, even though you and I have these similarities that I'd like, oh, yay, what I mean, we're very different. Yes. I don't even know all the ways yet, because we don't even know each other. Right. We're going to figure it out.
We gonna find out.
So, I hear you saying that the doctorate can be that barrier for people thinking that they know who you are and what you're about. Yeah. They're assuming social class background. They're assuming abilities to relate or expectation that you'll be out of touch. And they have no idea who you are. They have no idea until they get to know you're just DC. Yeah. And that's all. And that's everything that you are.
Absolutely. And I've been fortunate that it hasn't taken me that long for people to get to know me, because I'm open.
You really are.
I am an open book, and I share of myself. I am not a tabla. I'm not blank. Right. So people don't have to work that hard to crack who I am.
Got it.
So we usually move past that phase pretty quickly.
Yeah, you are very open and very warm, and also very engaging. That's your personality. I really appreciate that about your spirit. But I think about the folks who don't have that natural ability, right? And so the ways in which they're locked into other people's perceptions for lack of, or just haven't figured out their mojo yet around communicating who they are, which can be hard.
Yeah. I think one more thing that I would add to a drawback is, the other is, I don't try to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, I'm often not the smartest person in the room, but I do think that they're on the flip side of that continuum. Sometimes there's an assumption that you're a doctor, you must know everything about everything. No, ma'am or sir, I don't know everything about everything. And I'm not claiming to. In fact, creating space, that's part of partnership, right? That's part of relationship building. But for me, early in the spaces when I was, the youngest person in the room and trying to come into my own and fighting that imposter syndrome, like ooh, I do need to show how smart I am. I do need to, show how this degree has made me smarter. But luckily that is in my rear view.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting on and proving to anybody anymore in those spaces, in terms of, the validity of my my training.
Must be relaxing to put that down.
Yeah. That was a heavy bag.
That's one of the things that I admire so much about you is that you are a CEO of a pretty important organization and whose work is quite important. I've enjoyed learning more about Rubicon and just the impacts and all that is available there. It's the top seat.
Yeah.
It's not always available to Black women. And, there are a few people who are in this space, talking about what it means to sit in that role. One woman that I have read her work and follow it a bit is Minda Hart. She talks about securing the seat. I wish for you to share with our audience what the journey to securing the seat has been like for you.
Yeah. I love this question. And I have to start by acknowledging good fortune and privilege. It's not been without that. And what I mean by that is my experience in a lot of ways. I won't say smooth, but when I tell people how quickly I promoted from coming to Rubicon in 2016 to being appointed the CEO in 2020, they're like, what?
That's a short span of time.
Not a long time. And honestly, I feel like there was a destined and a higher power in terms of my purpose, which helps me accept what's in front of me. But that journey, on the one hand, I felt supported in it by my outgoing supervisor that was a CPO, and I took that seat, and the outgoing CEO, and I took that seat. However, on the surface, it looks like this was easy for you, DC. Oh, so fortunate, so privileged. Oh, you have that doctorate. That just helped
that got you there.
That just got you there on the. Let me tell you.
Bring out the tea service.
The hard work. The hard work, the internal work. It's not visible. It is not visible. It is very lonely. The questioning, the doubt, the experience in the room, even when on the surface it feels like this person supports me, this person endorses me. There's doubt and there's questioning there. So just speaking from my own experience, first layer is my headline is I felt supported in this journey. I felt like there were folks in my corner, there were allies, there were people who saw my fit for this opportunity. Under there was a layer of what is said and what is done. And what I mean by that is I definitely experienced the message of being supported, but I was still needing to jump through hoops. I still felt like there was a obstacle course in front of me to jump through, to demonstrate. And part of me was like, well, haven't I demonstrated? Aren't I here because you've seen the way that I've moved and what I've been able to do and what I've accomplished in this organization or in my prior organization? And so I have to tell you that in the context of this shared racial awakening that everyone had in 2020, everyone in air quotes, if you can't see this, but I'm doing air quotes, because in the nonprofit sector, and this is a filter on my own experience in its context, and it's not intrapersonal or even personal, it's context, and it's something that added to my experience of doubt, my experience of trust in terms of the process, because I had a lot of reflection and contemplation of why me, even though I knew I was okay, I was able and capable. I questioned why this system at this time was ready to support me into this seat. Was it me? Was it the leaders at the time wanted the next leader to be a Black woman? Was it me, or was it what I represented? right? Was it my body of work or was it convenient? So I was questioning all of this. And, you know, that again, while the lead message was believe in you, you're the right person for the job. And I believe that. Now look, I believe that.
Yeah.
But then when you get into your selection process, you know, and comparing your selection process to other processes, when you get into salary negotiation, we get to all those things that all of us have to do in career. That is where I was reminded that the doctorate doesn't, what's the word I'm trying to look for? The doctorate doesn't protect you or save you or absolve you from your other identities that are being maybe questioned.
Yeah.
And this is not coming out very eloquently. So I'm just talking through.
Please don't do that.
Okay.
This is a space for you, for us, and you are speaking just fine.
Yeah. So just the journey as a Black woman, again, there's layers. There's the intra, there's the inter, and then there's the systemic, right? And I too felt like I would be a good next leader of Rubicon programs. And my predecessor thought so too, right? And it was not a space where we could ignore the fact that she was a white woman passing the reins to a Black woman. We can't, like, I don't know. I'm still struggling with what is the right amount of attention, right? Without discrediting my capability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Without discrediting oneself or the fit for the job.
One of the things I'm thinking about, you know, because I have a feeling that we probably have similar community backgrounds too. So we'll talk about that at another time on our off time. But that idea of community members, of folks who see you and say, oh, that doctor worked for you, girl. You got it. You're doing great. Da, 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 da. We're proud of you. But also you got that because you got the doctorate.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then you being in that space where you're seeing that my doctorate and you know, or my JD, my MBA, working in the Obama administration, whatever the bona fides is, doesn't protect me from, you know, the intersectional microaggression, macro impact of having to be smarter, faster, stronger, having a different rubric for who can be, you know, for my evaluation. And so there's a gaslighting, I feel like, happens there that can be hard, and who can relate to that? I think similarly situated people certainly can relate to that. I can, you know, but also all that happening in the context of an organization that is trying to prove to the world that it's done its racial reckoning, but then is also having to make sure that they're having a conversation and with themselves. And I know that this is not unique to that particular context. That's what we know, is that this is what the conversation is.
Yes.
That they're also probably sending you through different types of changes and experiences because they want to, you know, offset or have to offset the conversation that naturally happens around quote unquote affirmative action when related to folks of color, and particularly Black people and Black women. It sullies the experience. I can't imagine what that must have felt like to you.
It felt muddied, sullied, right? The excitement, right? The excitement, wanting to celebrate the achievement, because it is an accomplishment and
it's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah.
But I remember muting. I mean, one, it was COVID. So I also don't feel like I really celebrated or acknowledged or, you know, didn't share that excitement moment with family even, right? Most of that was COVID. So I can't put that on that experience, but it is a dance. It is a dance of being excited and being proud and staying humble, right? And you know, the reality is, okay, in your first year as a CEO, you are going to have different insights than an outgoing CEO who's been in the seat for 20 years, right? However, it is very difficult to not experience some of the oversight as, again, here I go, me being younger, me being a Black woman, me being, you know, all of those things, despite the doctorate. But so I think for me, my overarching headline and narrative about my journey to this seat was supportive, not just from the people who preceded me, but also from community. So Rubicon has a pretty significant representation of staff who identify as Black.
Okay.
And so that meant the world to me to have staff who I had worked with as peers and colleagues really support me and endorse me on this journey. That was huge. That they saw in me a capability, and it wasn't just about, oh, we can relate to DC, but a belief and a confidence that I could do this job. And that went a long way on this journey. And so for me, I think overarching, there's always the private journey. The public journey and the private journey, in terms of the things that I was wrestling with in private, that, didn't come across as the bubbly DC in the room who was, interviewing or sharing with colleagues of my interest, right? So definitely multiple layers on this journey, and humbling layers on this journey. But overall, it did feel supportive. And I just put a pin on this. It was important for me in this journey, or felt necessary, that I needed my community that I identify with to support me in this journey and to validate my experience in my journey. But I also needed the approval and the validation of predecessors, board members, and those are overwhelmingly were not of my community.
Well, okay. And so you've been in the role now for how long?
A year and a half. A year and a half.
So it's still,
knocking on 2 years in November.
So very much still in its early days. These big leadership roles, it takes a moment to warm that seat. What's your experience of keeping the seat? How do you experience that, accountabilities to boards, to staff, to predecessors and all the rest, key stakeholders?
I mean, let's not forget, we still in this COVID environment. So all of this was going down in a remote/hybrid environment. And so one of my strengths and my assets is relationship and connecting. And so getting the seat and keeping the seat has really been about making extra effort to be connected and to be visible and to be accessible in this remote hybrid reality. And so
what's that been like for you? Because you're very gregarious, very warm, but I can imagine, and it does come through online. We're meeting in Zoom meetings look like this too, right?
Exactly.
But how did that feel to you? Did you feel like it was easy for you to do, or did you feel exhausted in trying to do this?
Just different. I think just different, exhausted in a different way, because had the society in cafes and coffee shops and wherever I would be connecting with people personally, I was doing so, like you said, via Zoom or whatnot. And so just intentional. And yes, I thank you in terms of the feedback of coming through and me coming across the screen,
for sure.
Which is my experience, but it's different. It's different. And I just think the availability is different. And so, just having time to calendar a coffee chat or something with folks was different. For me, it's showing up most significantly right now with my board. Like right now, I inherited a board, right? This board is established. And so I am making an effort to spend individual time with board members, but that's been difficult. Our board meetings are remote in Zoom, and everyone is really busy, and I don't necessarily want to do individual in the Zoom, because this is part of my process of trying to accept, hold, relate to the board as my board, not just an established inherited board. Like this is my board, right? Not my predecessor's board.
How do I get us in relationship where we are facing out in the world together, partnering to accomplish the goals of this organization?
Getting in relationship. And some of that comes through the standing board meetings and in conversations. But I think that is one part of keeping the seat that has felt different given the context of COVID and Zoom. I also think going back to the early career of proving, right? And you heard me say I put that bag down, right? But there is a certain level of not proving, but demonstrating that not only are you managing this crisis and the urgencies that are required in terms of adaptability and responsiveness to COVID, you also need to be moving an organization towards the vision and the mission. And so keeping the seat is really about, am I doing good enough? Right? Am I demonstrating how good I'm doing? Because I think I've gotten much positive feedback, right? And not necessarily specific feedback. So then I feel like I need to be attending to the details, right? And not in a way that I'm waving a flag or tooting a horn, but staying in communication, being responsible for accountability. That's the word I'm trying to come up on, what accountability looks like in terms of part of keeping the seat in this environment. Is it's been interesting. And if I have to speak a little bit about accountability, holding me accountable as a Black woman and CEO, I have to tell you that my experience is this first year, I had a lot of reflection about, am I being held accountable in the same way? Like this feels like some extra sting on, especially around the racial and equity work, right? Racial equity work, and we're doing a lot of work around LGBTQ plus community, and just how sometimes that work doesn't feel, it feels fragmented sometimes, and communities don't always see, members of some communities don't always see themselves in the efforts of other communities. And so as a Black woman, cis het, you know, the normativity and the bias and the privilege, right, was being called out in a way that I felt like my predecessor wasn't under the same firing squad, if you will. So for me, keeping the seat has been a lot about meeting people's expectations and my humanity, and the reality that I'm not going to meet everybody's expectations. I'm just not. And I'm not, I don't move in a way, I don't wake up and be like, you know what, somebody gonna be mad today. I don't move like that. Like I'm moving, setting out the day, trying to be my best self and be the most responsive that I can, to my team, to our staff at large. And so I just think that in terms of keeping the seat, for me, the narrative around that has been a lot about not popularity, but about responsivity, right? Transparency, you know, communication, accessibility, all of that for me has been about keeping the seat and really having to stand in those hard places sometimes of not being able to meet everyone's needs in that moment.
I really, you know, when you talk about being the CEO of an organization in the midst of a societal racial reckoning, and the ambivalence around the strong words used initially versus the long-term sustained actions beyond that time, and how a person of color, how a Black person, how a Black woman's work in that space, particularly when she's in charge, is evaluated differently, or could be evaluated differently, or that there's higher hopes and expectations. You know, I really, that resonates in so many ways, particularly just thinking about the magical thinking that people have around what you're going to be able to do because maybe you're not white and you're, you know, not a man, or you're not, whatever the case may be. But you still have entered into a culture that has been established and has been itself for many years. And so we can only move at the speed of trust and what people have capacity and capability to do. So whether you're sitting there or somebody else is there ahead of you, we are capped at that ability of others, and have to scaffold it. So I just want to name that, because I'm really curious about these DEI jobs. I said DEIB jobs, and the pressures and the impossibility of them that I see many folks of color who get these positions, but I wonder about their health in those spaces. And so when you're the CEO, there's even a higher expectation.
Absolutely.
That the organization is just going to be transformed. And it's like, that is as quick as we all can be transformed. So how quick do human beings move? And I can tell you, you know, as a psychologist, it takes some time.
It takes some time. That's so spot on. And I just would double click that and say, my experience of that has been less so about board accountability or even my colleagues on the executive team. It's been about us. Like we was rooting for you, and you know we endorsed you because you supposed to change this. You know, and move it differently or move it faster.
Move
So
it
absolutely,
faster.
absolutely. That's real, and that's part of that managing the expectations, and staying in right relationship while you're doing that.
That's
my colleague often
say it again for the people back there.
Listen,
staying in those right relationships. That's
staying
so real.
in right relationship, because hopefully in an ideal situation, the foundation is there, right? We're not always going to agree. I'm not always going to meet your needs in the moment, but it's been my experience and the fortunate experience that in most cases, the foundation of trust and confidence doesn't waver.
That's right.
And that's about staying in right. Like it's like siblings. We gonna fight and we're going to disagree, but that's my sister, that's my brother, and we're going to stay in this relationship, and nobody else better not. So in the context of work and professional relationships, it's really in that type of mutuality and respect and being has to be present, not just in a hierarchical relationship and from a leadership seat, but when we think about change and systems change and partnerships and being in a space where you are in a coalition or a collaborative and you are sitting with people who don't have the same experiences as you. Or the same lens as you. Everybody's ascribing to the same values, right? Equity. But in terms of, what that looks like or how do we get there, or what am I willing to give up to get there? Hey, we're talking about a whole range of different, but the relationship, the right relationship is something that, going back to counseling psychology and the fit in the toolbox, I think is really, important to hold and hold space for that.
So when you think about your experience as a Black woman in senior executive leadership, what have been some of the most challenging aspects of leading, and what have been some of the most rewarding?
Yeah. Some of the most challenging, I think, is, continuing up the line of thinking when it comes to expectations. Black girl magic, the unicorn, you are special. You're be able to make it all better. And part of you wants to be that for community, right?
Really
part of you,
do.
Oh my goodness, I want to rise to that expectation, but I'm human, and one person. And so I think if I had to sum it up in a couple words, it would just be managing the expectations that are often not realistic or reflective of my humanity, right?
That's right.
I have multiple roles. I'm not just a leader of this nonprofit organization. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I like to do some other things. So that is, I think, one of the hardest pieces, but also, and one thing that I'm trying to do more explicitly is model being, there is an expectation, I think, and I talk to my colleague about this all the time. There's a normalcy about being tired as a Black woman. And if you ain't tired, you ain't working hard enough if you're not tired, if you're not fatigued and exhausted. I feel responsible to help change that narrative. I feel responsible to normalize a wellness day, not just a sick day. Take your wellness day. Take care of yourself, right? Flex. Take your time to be present for family. Your child has a ward activity. Go to the baby's award activity. Like we are whole people, and we tout this as a theory. We tout this as a service model, but we don't always afford our own self the space to be whole people. And so that's one of the good things. The flips of the coin, right? Is managing those expectations that you are never going to tire. And that you can fix it all because Black women are magical.
Right.
Flip side is dispelling that myth, but in a way that's not disappointing, but it's connecting and it's humanizing.
And having the power to set policy and practice and culture in a positive and healthy way that allows everyone to be more human, right? Your humanity, you're realizing and living in your humanity opens that up for everybody else in that space that you do have some power to control.
Absolutely.
So typically in our field, folks go the route of academia or psychological service in a range of organizations, private practice or whatnot. You took your experience to the nonprofit space. And I'm really, I'd want if you could just share a little bit about like why you made that choice and what advice you would give for folks who are trying to decide like, where do I want to go?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For me, it was my end game was to be available and accessible to my community.
Okay.
And I was reflecting on this recently. I think there was something in my training that had ingrained in me. If you want to do therapy with your community, don't do private practice. Nobody's paying to come see a therapist or a psychologist. That was what I left graduate school thinking to be true. I now know that not to be the case. We have a lot of families of color investing in private practice and coming out of pocket or whatever. So I know that not to be true. But at that time, I was following my goal and my dream of serving my community. And I felt like nonprofit and community mental health was the best setting to have that access and availability. And so mind you, Children's Hospital was not a nonprofit, but I didn't want to work in the hospital forever. And it just gave me access to the school-based health centers, which felt very much community and nonprofit-ish, even though it was a nonprofit, but it's community mental health. So definitely those settings were a good fit for me because of the accessibility and the reach that I wanted to have and who I was trying to give access to mental health counseling services.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I say one?
Yeah, please. Absolutely.
So fast forward to now, the program that I went through, my counseling psychology background was the scholar practitioner model. And so there was a heavy emphasis on research, but also on the clinical practice. And so nonprofit also gives me the setting opportunity and the kind of the range of tasks to apply the clinical piece, direct service piece, but also the research and the data piece. Because I think that narrative, storytelling, data interpretation is a huge piece of nonprofit sustainability. And that's part of the role that I embrace the most, is being responsible for that narrative, right? Being responsible for how data is used beyond the reporting. Like data is so much bigger than your funding. Data is so much bigger than widgets and number of people that you served and how many people you placed in jobs, but really being hands-on with our data team, right? About what is the data telling us about the experience of community and the experience of participants, and how do we need to be responsive to that with the data that we're learning. We always say data informed. Okay, well, what level of data informed are we talking about?
I love too that you're saying data responsive, not data informed. Like informed suggests a passive, receiving of that data. But responsive means we're going to do something with what we learn.
Yeah.
So one important element of the conversation on She Been Ready, the podcast, is to think about the Black women early in their career, or those, who are raising Black girls, or who are, at these transition points. And you've spoke to a few pivotal or transition moments through our conversation. If you were to be speaking to them, thinking about the younger self, what advice or words of wisdom would you impart to them about becoming a CEO, being someone who understands the human experience deeply in the context of leadership?
Yep. I would say use it all.
Okay.
Use it all. Use all of you. Bring all of you. Again, my early experiences, I felt like I had to fragment myself. I couldn't be a good psychologist if I was also a mother, because that means you're distracted from the work. So bring it all. Use all of yourself. All of you have something to offer. Your whole self, right? Yes. And also, you're not alone.
That's right.
Those private moments, those private thoughts, that private doubt, talk to somebody, because inevitably you have a sister friend or a supervisor or a colleague or a cousin or auntie, mentor, to not have to wrestle with that in silence or in isolation. Build your community and know that it's not a flaw of you. It's not a personal flaw. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong path, right? Bring all of you and tap in. Tap into your community, into your network. Don't suffer unnecessarily in silence or isolation.
Okay. I love that. And finally, what are you up to? What's your work or your vision for things right now? Are there things that you're manifesting that, call for you to lead in a particular way in this moment that feel interesting and that you feel open to sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always start, my day job is, on the horizon, again, coming out of a pandemic, coming out of survival mode and really getting us back to thriving. And a big part of that is going into our strategic planning process. So related to that, I'm really excited about, and I can give you credit for this in terms of spaces and opportunities and platforms to talk more, to share more about the work, right? To spread the narrative, to publish. Like I hadn't thought about publishing in years, but we have so many learnings at Rubicon. I want Rubicon to publish its learnings and the work that we're doing because we're doing it in a good way. Like there are a whole lot of workforce service agencies, but there are things that we are doing that are innovative and that are effective, are culturally responsive. And why should we keep that to ourselves? Why should that only be in a report to a funder? So I'm super excited about, really partnering to share our data in publications, to do conferences, just to really get connected back to the field of workforce, nonprofit, and psychology. Right? Really bringing these things together, right? Nonprofit workforce as a counseling psychology intervention. Like this is serving me. This is serving me in my integrated identity because I come so far from being the only psychologist in my work setting, right? And so didn't really have that community until Dr. Wendy came along. Hey, counseling psychology. So what's exciting and what's next for me is one, continue to represent Rubicon well and to lead it to lead us towards our vision, but leveraging those learnings in that platform to get back connected to the field of psychology, counseling psychology particularly, and also sharing data and learnings in the field of workforce services.
I really love the full circle nature of our conversation, coming right back to the integration piece and how that actually is supporting you being even more grounded in your leadership holistically as a whole being.
Yeah. Trying to be out here. That's what I have.
DC, I'm trying to be outside. Out here. You are outside. You are outside. I want to just thank you so very much. I know we went a little over time in our time together, but it's just been so fruitful and so rich. Thank you so much for joining me on She Been Ready, the podcast.
My pleasure. It's been great. Happy to come back. Invite me back.
I will definitely invite you back.
Right on.